This lesson is taken directly from my Start to Finish hardware course. You can get full access using the link in the description below. So what we're going to focus on first is mainly recording the drums. So we've got these drums here with the shakers and the rides, and I'm going to focus on that to start with. So we're just going to get those recorded into Ableton. Now, to make things a little bit more interesting, what I'm going to do is actually use the Oto Machine's Boum, which is on the left here. So I apologize for the really wide shot at the moment with everything in. When I zoom into things, it might not be as clear as the shot before, but I just wanted to make sure that we get the boom in. This is like rigged in at the moment, so I can't really move it around because the cables are locked underneath. But what I've got is a Patchbay up there. I'll probably put something on the screen right now to show you what that looks like. It's the DF Audio Minibay, and that allows me to patch anything into anything within my studio using just small little Euro rack cables that you use for modular. Now, we could get really creative with this, and I could send the drums into loads of different things. Like I could send it into this bonkers module, these tube modules I've got here. I could destroy it with a plague bearer and do loads of crazy creative routing. But that's something that I like to do when I'm basically coming up with an idea. So if I'm working with, say, the alpha bass, I'll do creative distortion along the way as I'm creating the patch. I feel like we've come up with something really cool here that doesn't need too much. I kind of like how it sounds already. We've added distortion to the individual tracks. We've also added master distortion as well on the Digitakt 2, so you can see there. So there's not really much more I want to add to it, but I do want to give it some of that nice analog warmth coming from the Oto Boum as it goes in. Now, I'm going to talk you through the process of how I like to record my tracks into Ableton. So you can use Overbridge. You can record stuff straight from the outputs into a sound card. You can try and do it over USB and record things separately. What I like to do is I like to simplify things. So what I mean by that is I like to take a signal as a group, so like the drums, and instead of separating everything and overcomplicating things in Ableton, I like to get a good sound going in through analog gear, and then I've got a nice group that all interacts with each other. And then if I need to do any cutting, I can just cut into the audio loop. And it's took me ages to get to this point where I'm able to basically have basically limit my freedom of what control I have over the sounds, but I find that this gets me a much better sound and limits things in a way that makes me more creative. So for me, it's all about getting a good bus mix going into Ableton. So this is my main template. It's missing an Octatrack cue, which is usually in there. I've took that away. And then you'll notice that these outputs here, in fact, let me go back and just explain this a bit better. So we've got the alpha bass left and right. I can treat them as mono inputs. Digitakt and Syntakt stereo inputs. Typhon stereo input. We've also got the MAM MB33 as a mono. We've got the Pro 1, the K2, and the SY1, which we're not using for this, and they're all coming in as mono as well. And then we should have an SY2 as well. That's not there at the minute, but SY2 is the second channel of the SY. Of the Behringer Sync cushion. And then we've got Octatrack Q, which is not there at the moment. And then we've got the system record, which allows me to record my system. So if I can basically sample YouTube or resample stuff from Spotify if I want, and just do anything like that, really. It's just taking it from these inputs. Now, I'm able to do this because I have a very robust sound card. So I have the MOTU 16A, which has 16 inputs and 16 outputs. So that, alongside my DF Audio Minibay, it gives me a lot of flexibility in the studio, which is great. So let me just let me bring this up. So yeah, you can see we've got 16 inputs and 16 outputs. I'm not even using all the outputs or the inputs just yet, but you can see how everything's coming in there. Then we go to the routing. This took me ages to get used to, like how to use it. So don't worry if this just looks crazy to you right now, but basically it's a matrix patch bay like this. And let me just open it up, and you can send stuff from the analog inputs and outputs to ADAT. You can also send it to and from the computer. You can also send it to the mix console and create like sub mixes and auxiliary mixes. Very cool stuff. But what I'm doing is kind of bringing everything into Ableton, and I also have the power to send it back out as well. So you can see here we've got the 11 out and 12 out. we're going to be using these during the recording phase, because you'll see the Digitakt comes through on the Digitakt channel, and I could simply just record it there, but what we want to do is we want to send it to the Oto machine's boom. So the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to bring the signal into Ableton, but then I'm going to send it back out onto patch 11 and patch 12. So these can be mono outputs, but I'm going to basically join them in a second and create one stereo output. So you can see there I've got 11 out and 12 out. And the reason why these are identical groups is because you can see I've got this submix here. So the Digitakt at the moment is down, but if I bring this up, so let's just let's mute Digitakt, bring this up. And now you can hear the left channel, the stereo channel from the Digitakt being summed into mono and then going into the Oto machine's boom. So really straightforward. When I'm in the studio, this just makes everything really easy and simple. Now I understand that most of you guys won't have 16 inputs and outputs, so this is a bit over convoluted, and you can do it by simply just patching the Digitakt 2 into the Oto Boum or a similar device and then sending that straight into a sound card. So you could do it that way as well, which I've done for many years. So don't worry about this too much. You don't have to copy me. But if you've got a MOTU 16A, you can take some inspiration from this. So you can see that that signal is coming back on this K2 channel here at the moment, because that's the way I patched it in. And that should be input 15, which it is. So what I've done is I've patch these into 15 and 16. If we go to this one here, 15/16, that's a stereo signal. So this will bring in a stereo signal now. Now let's just change that to Oto Boum. And then these outputs, what I want to do is just disable the second one for now. And we're going to turn this one into stereo outputs. So let's go external out. Let's go to 11/12 patch. Let's just try it. So you can see now, I've got a stereo signal. Let's just test that by going to the kick drum and changing the panning. So you can see there we've got that going on. Now there's another step that I want to do as well before we start recording, or should I say before we start tweaking the Oto Boum, is I want to go into the setup, so MIDI config of both machines, so both the Syntakt and Digitakt. And I want to change the sync to clock receive off on both of them. Now, the reason for this is that I don't want the clock from the Octatrack causing jitter on these machines. I'll put it back on the Syntakt so you can see what I mean. So if I press play now, miraculously, there is no jitter going on for some reason. That's very weird. Let me just turn that back off again, and maybe we'll try it on the Digitakt. Let me just turn this distortion off. So you can see there we've got 0.1, 0.0. Sometimes it'll go to 0.2, 0.1. So the sequencer and the clock is shifting around. And I don't want that for an obvious reason. So when we record separate parts in and then put them back together in Ableton, the clocks are going to be shifting around like this, and they're not going to be in time with each other because they're recorded at different moments. If you run all the machines together, which I very well could do, I could just record the machines as they are straight into Ableton, they will kind of stay in sync, like in a live set. But because we're recording in different moments, I want to be able to make sure that the clocks are synced, or that the BPMs remain consistent. So what I want to do then, just go into sync and turn that off on these. And we're not going to use the Octatrack anymore to trigger. We're going to just trigger it on here, and it'll give us a more stable clock. So the BPM, want to match the overall BPM, which is 136. And while we're here, let's just do it on this one as well. So there you go, 136. And now what we can do is basically start to develop the distortion side of things, right? So what we're going to do is just play it, and we're going to mess with the Oto Boum. So what I like to do is bring the drive and compressor down. And I also, in my settings, if you have an Oto Boum, this might be quite useful. On the input gain, I've just got it at 1 at the moment. You can boost it like this, but I'm going to keep it low because we have a very healthy signal there. Might even be a little too hot, so I'm just going to bring the main volume down on here. So this is your gain meter. As you can see, if I turn it down, it brings it down. What I want to do is just have it tickle in the top LED there. That's a very healthy gain. And then on these other settings, we've got attack. So that's a fast attack, that's a slow attack. For the drums and stuff like this, I like to leave the attack all the way up, let all the transient through. And then the release, I like to make it really short and snappy. And then that is also my settings for my live set as well. Low cut, leave this right down. That's basically so you can high pass it. If I go turn this on. So you can do creative distortion stuff by high passing the lower frequencies. Then we've got distortion, which will basically change the distortion type. To start with, I'll usually keep it on the first one. That's the mildest one. And as you go up, you can really smash stuff. So we're actually going to go for quite light saturation for this. We just want some of that nice analog vibe and compression on the recording. And then gate, leave that off at the moment. But if you've got a lot of noise coming through, so like buzzing from analog machines and stuff, you can turn the gate up and it'll actually cut the noise floor. So that's a good little tool. And then we've got high cut, which we don't really need to use. Right, so the way that I set this up is I make sure that my mix knob is all the way up to 100%. And we could use this later by adding a lot of distortion in and then basically mixing between dry and wet. But I'm going to bring it up because I want like 100% distortion to start with. I might change my mind, but we'll see how we get on. Right, so what I want to do now is just bring that volume knob down a little bit more. And then what we're going to do is just add a bit of compression. So you'll see, if I start to bring this up, you can see the compressor tickling there. If I push it all the way, we get a very heavy compressed sound, which sounds really nice, but it's a little bit too heavy for what I want to go for. I just want it tickling like 1 to 3 at the most of gain reduction. And we can listen to the before and after. So it's hard to kind of gain match it by ear. Let's just try and nudge it a bit. One more. So that's without the compression on. With compression on. Very subtle, but you can hear that. It just kind of lifts everything and gels it together a bit more, just adds a bit more glue. So now we've got that kind of sorted. The next thing to do is to add drive. Now, because I'm an absolute sucker for heavy distortion, I have a tendency to always want to crank this, because I just love the sound of distortion. But like I said, the sound of this is already kind of crunchy. I like it. I don't want to destroy it. So what we're going to do is just start to bring it up. And what I'm listening for is the kick drum. When the kick drum starts to sound broken and a bit too loose, that's when I know that I've gone too far for this style of kick drum. If it was a long kick drum, I might want to add a bit more of that so that the tail of it gets saturated. But this is quite a short, snappy kick drum. I don't want it to sound too broken and crunchy. So I'd say that's quite nice though, but there it starts to sound a little bit kind of like muffly, a little bit broken. So what I'm going to do is just start to bring it back a bit. I'd say around there is kind of nice. And then what we want to do, we want to gain match it. Just turn the rides off. That's really nice. It's subtle. It sounds like the original. I'm not changing the sound too much, but I'm just adding a little bit more weight and a lot more warmth and glue to the sound. And it's giving it a more polished sound as it goes in to Ableton. So let's just have a listen to the kick on its own. So it's also adding a little bit more kind of top end snappiness in there as well. It's on the edge of sounding a bit too broken, but that's fine. I feel like for me, that's the maximum that I can take it right now. Might just back off on the drive a little bit more. If you're finding this helpful, the full course dives even deeper from machine jam to the final mix. You'll find the link in the video description. Now we might have to back up a little bit because what I've noticed is we haven't actually level mixed this properly since we kind of made the idea. I've just done it by listening, which is fine because it's probably almost 100% anyway. But what we want to do before we record is obviously just make sure that everything is exactly how we want it. So what I'm going to do is just bring up a Pro Q on Ableton. And let's just look at where the kick is sitting. So this is almost on the line. I talked about this before. So what I like to do in Pro Q 3 or 4, whichever one you're using, go to this bit here, the analyzer, and put the settings on till 4.5 dB. That was wrong actually. And then resolution medium, speed medium. And what the 4.5 tilt does is, if we just take a look at the drums without the tilt on, you notice that the kick's really high and then it slopes down, that classic EQ slope. Now if you put the 4.5 dB tilt on, what it does is it puts the frequency response horizontal. So it actually, if you mix to this line, you'll kind of be almost 100% there for a good mix. So I use my ears, but I also like to use this as well, just to see where things are sitting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just listen to the kick to start with. And you can see I've got this rack here where I can basically set the amount that goes into the EQ. So this is not audible, this is actually on a separate chain. And it's basically just allowing me to add or take away gain so that I can set the level instead of messing with the actual mix and the master. So what I want to do is just make sure that my sub frequencies are kind of hitting the line. Then what we're going to do is bring in the first hat and the snare. Let's just look at that snare. So snare's quite hot, but I'll just bring it down a little bit. I mean, it's not unusual to have a hot snare anyway for electro, so that's absolutely fine. And also, I will say as well, actually trying to mix it once you've got your overdrive or distortion or whatever set up is not a bad idea, actually, because sometimes a unit like this will push the highs or the lows depending on the balance of the saturation curves and EQs and things like that. So it's actually good to get a good level, push it through something like that, then adjust it and tweak it once that's running hot. So let's just have a look at the snare. What I might do is just bring the snare down a touch. And then the hat. So I'm using my ears as well as using what I can see, because like I said, electro does run a little bit hotter. Also things like, yeah, you'll notice there, like a shaker with distortion will rise. So it's always good to rebalance that once you put the distortion on as well, and compression. Let's just make sure there's no low end fluff in these that we don't want. Oh, you've got the lower end of that snare as well. So what we need to do next is record the drums in. So we could just do a full take of the drums. That's not actually how I like to do it. What I like to do is break the drums down into their core elements to start with. So this is when you strip everything away from the drums to its most basic elements, what you're left with. For electro, it's usually pretty much the kick and snare or kick snare hats. So what I'll do is I'll record a pass of kick and snare, and then I'll record a pass of kick snare hats and shakers and so on. So it's quite a a lengthy process, but what you essentially end up with is loads of 8 or 16 bar loops, little just clips that you can basically use to arrange. And I love doing it this way. I used to basically try and create like a whole track and perform it in live, and as nice as that sounds and as cool as that sounds, I prefer to just reserve that for playing live now, because actually when you start working with audio and you have that ability to be able to just move stuff around very quickly and chop stuff up, it just makes it so much easier. So what we're going to do is we're going to flip around to this window, this view, the session, sorry, not session view, the arrangement view. And we're going to go to this Oto Boum track, and we're just going to make sure that none of the other tracks are on. So I'm using Command and click there to basically solo this one track as the record track. And then we're just going to hit play. So I can see the level coming through there, which is great. And let me just turn that one off. Let me also get this nice and hot as well. So I'm just turning up the Oto Boum. Turn my headphones down. It's got a nice level there, maybe like -10. That's absolutely fine. And then what we're going to do is just go back to this view, and we can start to record in our first loop. So I'm going to hit record. Actually, let's put the lower snare on as well. So I'm going to hit record, and then I'm just going to press play. In fact, before we do that, also make sure that your project is at the same BPM as what you're working on the machines. What I'm going to do as well is I'm just going to change the colour of this, so when the clips come up in the same colour, we can actually see the waveforms instead of it being black. And then let's just press play on that so we can see this properly. Bring it open like that. And then we need to decide whether we're recording 8 or 16 bar loops. So I think we should go for 16 bar loops, even though that takes a little bit longer, because some of the sequences are longer. So we won't do it like that. You could essentially do it like that if you wanted to. But what I'm going to do is just go ahead and label these as I go. So we go kick and snare. And then what I'm going to do is do one with the hats. I've noticed as well when I press stop sometimes, there's like this really nice kind of like little noise effect at the end, which I might chop and use at some point. So now we just need to decide what's next. So we could do shakers next. So let's just label this one. So we've got, in fact, what we'll do is we'll do it like this: BD, snare, hat. So shaker next. So now we're going to talk about how to get these back on grid. So what I'm going to do is open up another audio track. We'll keep this Oto Boum track as our recording track from the Oto Boum. And then I'm just going to label this track drums. Let's colour it orange. That's normally what I do it in. And then what I'm going to do is take all of these, bring them down like so, create another track. This one's just going to be snare fills, and that's going to be just this one hit here. We'll come to that in a second. So yeah, we've got this track now with all our recordings in. They're all tracked, so what I'm going to do... Oh, what have I done there? I've reversed that by accident. Let me see if I can put it back to normal. There we go. What I'm going to do is just go collect all and save. We don't want to lose any of this now. We've just spent ages recording that in. And what I'm going to do is just quickly show you how to get these lined up. Now I'll just do it for a couple because obviously don't want to do this for every single one, and I'll do this in my own time with the camera off. So what I like to do actually is, because I know that my project is 136, I know that these are recorded in 136, let's get rid of that warp function because I want these to just be recordings with no algorithm attached to them. No warp algorithm. Just want them to be like proper, pure, clean recordings. So what we're going to do is just go to this first one, watch your ears, just in case you hit play at the same time. In fact, I'm going to turn my headphones down. So obviously we're boosting the signal of this massively, so you do not want to hit play. But what we're doing is we're boosting it right up like this, and you can get right in there now and see where this starts, which is just there. You can see as we move that, it's going to change the playhead of where it starts. Once you found it, just delete that so it goes back to 0, and then if you zoom in, you should have it right on beat at the beginning there. Now let's just check it with the metronome. I don't know if you can hear that metronome due to the way that I've got Ableton set up, but if you can, obviously you can hear that's perfectly in sync. Then what I like to do is go right to the end and just notch off the end there. So you can see that little hit there is the start of the next kick drum for the next bar. So obviously because we're recording from hardware, this is never going to be perfectly on grid. Electrons, they vary so slightly. So you can see there, it's shifting back a little bit, but that is absolutely fine. Because everything we're recording is coming from mainly the electron sequences anyway, so they're always going to line up. And that little discrepancy of pushing back a little bit before the next bar doesn't really matter too much. It might even add something to the tracks, like in some weird way, like just a bit of push and pull, I'm not sure. But I've released a lot of tracks this way and they've been absolutely fine. So this is also key as well, why I said we need to make sure that, where is that starting there? We also need to make sure that we are taking the BPMs off the sync off, sorry, of the machines. So that's perfect. Again, let's just see how this sounds then. So I'll just show you. Going from this bit to the next one should be fine. Yep, absolutely fine. And then, because we're in audio as well, it gives you a little opportunity to do cutaways and stuff. You can like cut that away if you need to. So again, just show you this last bit at the end, and then we'll move on to the snare, and I'll come back and finish this off on my own. So yeah, we just rinse and repeat this for all of them, and it takes ages, but it's worth it. And then what we're going to do next is just take a look at this snare. It's the same thing, so I'm just going to solo it. Take the warp off. Now you've got options once you've done this. You can either use the audio, which is kind of what I like to do. I like to just shift the audio around, or you can create like a sampler with little MIDI tracks. But I've tried it both ways, and I just find it so much easier to do it this way. Let's just bring that right down. Let's color it as well. Let's assign color to them clips and assign this one as orange as well. In fact, my drums, I might just color them like a red, so we've got some distinction between them. This is all purposeful, by the way, and that'll become apparent later when we start to arrange how easy it becomes once you basically label things. So this snare drum, I'll just show you exactly what we're going to do with it later. So let's say we've got this kind of bit here, and then we want to add like a little snare fill. They're your snares, them big ones there. What you want to do is just like create like a little fill. Like this. And it's just so easy then. And as we go through the arrangement later, you'll notice that what I'll tend to do is do things like this. Even like little cutbacks as well, like that. Which will make more sense once we've got everything running. But you get the idea. So basically, that's our snare fill track, and we just go through the track peppering little snare fills at the end of 8 or 16 bars.